The silver coins were heavy in his palm. How many were left? And why did this small pile of metal determine whether his family would eat this week or lose their home forever? In the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago, money was not something earned through regular wages or managed through bank accounts. For centuries, we have imagined biblical economics with modern financial systems in mind. But the reality was harsher, more precarious, and profoundly meaningful. When debt struck a Palestinian household, it brought not just financial hardship, but the threat of slavery, the loss of ancestral land, and the destruction of family identity. Every loan carried crushing interest. Every missed payment threatened catastrophe. When you understand how money and debt shaped daily existence in first-century Palestine, the economic parables of Jesus take on a weight and urgency we have forgotten. Stay until the end, because what you discover reveals why forgiveness of debts was never just about money. Picture a small farmer standing outside his stone house as the sun rises over Galilean hills. In his weathered hands he counts the same few silver denarii he counted yesterday. His wheat harvest fell short this year. The Roman tax collector will arrive within days. The debt he owes to his neighbor, borrowed against this year's crop, cannot be repaid. His wife watches from the doorway, calculating. If they cannot pay the tax, Roman soldiers will seize their land. If they cannot repay the debt, their neighbor has the legal right to claim their property. If they have no property left, they face slavery as the only option to survive. The margin between independence and bondage was measured in handfuls of coins, not in sophisticated banking systems with payment plans, not with social safety nets to catch the falling, but in an economy where most people lived, one harvest away from disaster, where debt was the difference between eating and starving, and where financial failure meant the loss of everything that defined family and identity. The money in your hand determined everything. But which money? A farmer walks into the marketplace, holding bronze coins earned from selling grain. He needs to pay his Roman tax, but the collector only accepts silver denarii bearing the emperor's image. He approaches a money changer who quotes an exchange rate. The farmer cannot read. He cannot verify the weight of the coins he receives. He leaves with less value than he arrived with. But he has no choice. These denarii troubled him for another reason. The emperor's face was stamped on every coin, with inscriptions declaring his divine status. For an observant Jew, even touching such coins violated God's law against graven images. Yet without them, Roman soldiers would take his land. At the temple, different coins were required. Only special shekels could pay the annual temple tax or purchase sacrificial animals. More money changers, more fees, more value lost in translation between what he had and what he needed. In nearly every exchange, someone with knowledge took advantage of someone without it. The tax collector arrives before harvest. A farmer owes tribute to Caesar in silver he does not yet possess. He owes property tax on land whose value exceeds his annual income. He owes the temple tax that every man must pay. His neighbor, who lent him seed money in the spring, expects repayment at harvest time, with interest that Jewish law theoretically forbade, but everyone practiced anyway. The wheat is not yet golden in the fields. The payment is due today. He walks to the home of a wealthier landowner and asks to borrow 10 denarii. The terms are simple. Repay 15 denarii after harvest, or pledge his land as collateral. There is no negotiation. There is no alternative. His children watch as their father signs a contract he cannot read, agreeing to terms he barely understands. Tax collection itself was a business. Rome sold the right to collect taxes to private contractors who paid a fixed amount upward and kept whatever excess they could extract. The system rewarded aggression. A tax collector who showed mercy earned less. Penalties came swiftly. A missed tax deadline meant property seizure within days. Appeals were expensive and slow, designed to fail. Wealthy families paid in advance to avoid penalties. They maintained relationships with officials who reduced their assessments. Poor families chose between paying taxes and buying food. The debt came due at harvest time. The wheat yield was good, but not good enough. The farmer counted out 13 denarii to the landowner who had lent him 10. He apologized. He still owed 2 more. Could he have another month? The landowner's face hardened. The contract specified full payment today. No extensions, no partial credit. The farmer pleaded. The landowner called witnesses. By sunset, the farmer's land was measured and marked. It now belonged to his creditor. His family could stay and work it as tenants, paying rent from future harvests. Or they could leave. They stayed. But now they worked land that had been theirs for generations, paying someone else for the privilege. Interest rates reached 50% annually. Religious law forbade charging interest to fellow Jews, but this was easily circumvented. Interest became fees or penalties or gifts expected at repayment. A loan of 10 denarii required 15 back within a year. For a subsistence farmer who could barely feed his family in a good season, this mathematics led only one direction. Payment terms allowed no flexibility. Loans came due on specific dates, regardless of crop yields or market conditions. A family might successfully pay 90% of what they owed and still lose everything for the final 10%. When families could no longer pay, they sold their children. A daughter brought a higher price because she was young. A son could work for years before age diminished his value. Parents watched children led away to distant households, knowing they might never see them again. Some parents sold themselves instead, hoping to spare their children, but debt compounded faster than labor could satisfy it. The mother stands in the doorway, watching her 10-year-old son leave with the creditor's servant. Her husband sits inside, face in his hands. They owed 8 denarii. They could not pay. Their son's labor for the next 6 years will satisfy the debt. She will see him again when he is 16, if he survives. If the creditor honors the terms, if circumstances do not create new debts that extend his service. She returns to her work. There is still wheat to grind, bread to bake, survival to manage. But the doorway feels larger now. The house feels emptier. The coins they could not gather have taken her child. Farmers borrowed against future crops and found themselves trapped in cycles where each year's harvest paid for last year's survival. Craftsmen borrowed for tools and discovered their earnings barely covered interest, leaving nothing for their own needs. Women faced particular vulnerability. A widow inherited her husband's debts, but not his property rights. Young women were sold into slavery to satisfy family debts, with no legal recourse or protection. Wealth accumulated steadily upward. Landowners lent money to smaller farmers and acquired their land through foreclosure. Temple aristocrats collected tithes and controlled religious commerce. Roman officials controlled tax collection and allocated government contracts to supporters. At the bottom, day laborers competed each morning for work that might not exist. They were paid in small bronze coins that bought only immediate necessities. Injury, age, or economic downturn left them with nothing. The disparities were visible everywhere. In the marketplace, wealthy merchants stored grain during abundant harvests and sold at inflated prices during shortages. In the temple courts, money changers profited from pilgrims' religious obligations. In courtrooms, legal processes favored those with resources and connections. The system was maintained through laws that protected property over people, through customs that attributed poverty to moral failure, through religious interpretations that justified inequality as divine will. Into this world, Jesus spoke about debt forgiveness, fair wages, and economic justice. when he taught his followers to pray, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." Everyone listening knew exactly what debts meant. Not abstract spiritual failings, but the unpayable obligations that enslaved families. The loans that accumulated interest faster than work could satisfy them. The collateral agreements that meant children being sold. The missed payments that meant losing ancestral land. Debt forgiveness was not a metaphor. It was liberation. When Jesus told the parable of the unforgiving servant, a man forgiven a massive debt, who then refused to forgive a small amount owed to him, his audience recognized their own world. They knew creditors who showed no mercy. They knew the weight of obligations they could never satisfy. They understood that forgiveness could mean the difference between freedom and slavery. When he spoke about the dishonest manager who reduced debts owed to his master, he addressed the corruption that characterized every lending relationship. When he overturned the money changers' tables in the temple, he confronted the religious commercialization that exploited people's spiritual obligations. When he said it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter God's kingdom, he spoke to people who watched wealth concentrate among the few, while poverty deepened among the many. His teachings about not storing up treasures on earth, about the impossibility of serving both God and money, about selling possessions to give to the poor. These challenged the values that drove the entire debt system. His association with tax collectors scandalized religious leaders precisely because these were the people who enforced the machinery that destroyed families. Yet Jesus ate with them, called them to follow him, and demonstrated that transformation was possible even for those who profited from exploitation. His healings restored people's ability to work and earn income. His feeding miracles addressed the fundamental hunger that drove people into debt. His disciples abandoned their economic pursuits to join a movement that prioritized human welfare over profit accumulation. The cross itself represented the consequence of challenging systems that benefited from exploitation. Jesus' teachings about economic justice threatened those who profited from debt slavery, tax collection, and religious commerce. But his resurrection demonstrated that divine justice ultimately triumphs over human greed. The son of a carpenter grew up watching families destroyed by debts they could not repay. He saw children sold into slavery to satisfy creditors. He witnessed people working primarily to service obligations rather than support their own families. When he later taught about debt forgiveness, he spoke to people who knew financial desperation intimately. They had felt the weight of unpayable obligations, the fear of losing their homes, the desperation of having nothing left to sell. The Christ, who promised freedom from bondage, first lived within economic constraints that threatened families with destruction. He knew the anxiety of counting insufficient coins, the crushing pressure of systems designed to concentrate wealth among the few, while impoverishing the many. Understanding this world transforms how we read his teachings about money, debt, and economic responsibility. They are not abstract moral principles, but concrete hope, offered by one who knew what it meant to live under economic systems that valued profit over people. The forgiveness he proclaimed addressed the financial obligations that enslaved entire families. The justice he promised included economic systems that served human needs rather than exploited human vulnerabilities. The kingdom he announced offered liberation from the debt cycles that trapped the poor while enriching the wealthy. And if this documentary has deepened your understanding of the economic world where Jesus taught about debt forgiveness and justice, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with others who seek to understand the historical foundations that give weight to eternal promises. Your support helps us continue exploring the realities that shaped our Savior's ministry. Until the next video, may God bless you.